Right, we're getting everything started this morning. Welcome to our Global Digital Health Network Gender Deep Dive. Apologies for the delay in letting you into the room. We had a couple of technical difficulties, but we are getting through those. So I'd like to encourage everyone to please introduce yourselves in the chat. And please feel free to use this chat function throughout our session today to offer comments, to ask questions. We'll be monitoring that. So we really want this to be a very interactive session today. I will introduce myself. My name is Amanda Bendor. I work at PATH on Digital Square, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Gender Small Working Group as part of the Digital Health and Interoperability Working Group. My co-facilitators today, some who are still getting on the line, so thank you for your patience, are Elizabeth Orlati Parrish. She's from Japaigo. We also have Erica Trancasso, who is also at Japaigo, Alice Liu at PATH, Patty Michelle from Health Enabled, and Steve Ullis from JSI. So you're going to have a very dynamic group of facilitators today to walk you through presentations, interactive sessions, case studies. We're really excited. If you are very adamant about speaking up about something during the session today, you can also use the mic function. We have that on. So if you really want to not use the chat and use your voice, you are very much empowered to do so. I am going to cut my video off and share screen. So just give me 2 seconds. I want to get our slides up and going. Oh, the host has disabled participant screen sharing. Steve, do you think you could help me out with that?
I got you, Amanda.
Awesome.
We would be happy to.
Awesome. Cut my video on so you can enjoy my background of Porto. All right.
Christina, you got it? You want me to?
I got it.
Fantastic.
Can everybody let me know when you can see the slides?
Yep, I see it.
Yep, we're good.
All right, I'm trying to do the presentation, but just 2 seconds. It's not letting me do it. There we go. All right, we good? Okay, so here's our agenda today. I'm Amanda, I've already done some introductions. I'm going to talk you through some of the priorities and activities of the DHNI working group. Then we're going to have Elizabeth join us and talk about gender terminology and why this matters. Elizabeth is a gender expert at Japaigo, and we're really fortunate to have her join us today. Then we're going to move into a discussion where we really want to hear from you all about your experiences with gender-sensitive programming. This is a safe space to share positive experiences and not so positive experiences. And I think it's very important to share some of the things that you've seen that haven't been good so that we can work together and move forward. Then we'll do our case studies. So what we'll do when we do the case studies is break into different meeting rooms. We have 4 case studies to dive into, and you'll get to choose which one you want to do. One will be on leadership, one will be on developers, so observations, challenges with developers in the space, one will be on data, and one will be on frontline health workers. So again, you will have the option to choose. Then we have a discussion session, again led by Elizabeth, to talk about the dangers of being gender blind. And then we'll wrap up today with taking action, and as this group and as individuals making commitments to supporting gender sensitive programming and gender equity in our space. Okay, we're gonna skip this Minty, we might come back to that. All right, so I wanna open and share some of the priorities and activities of the DHNI Gender Working Group. So this working group evolved, it began really in January, early part of this year, as kind of spinning out from the Global Digital Health Forum last year and some conversations that took place on gender. So these are our objectives as the group. We want to develop guiding principles for the DH&I working group as a whole on gender-sensitive programming. We want to create a call to action for organizations to encourage gender representation in digital health. We want to identify and catalog existing gender committees, working groups, etc., as well as organizations and initiatives, and then connect DH&I members with these groups, as well as other networks, such as the Global Digital Health Network. And we've done quite a bit of this cataloging. I'll share a bit more later. And we want to finally accelerate socialization and advocacy of gender messaging. So these are our guiding principles that we put together. We really put these together as a way to increase innovation, productivity, and ROI. These underline of all of this. And the goal is to catalyze the DH&I working group to embrace gender equity, increase gender awareness, and to champion gender equity in action. So I'll read through these quickly. Our principles are to educate, engage members on solutions, best practices, and benefits of inclusion and greater representation. We want to encourage and raise awareness of the importance of equitable women's leadership and participation in all aspects of digital health programming and governance. And I think a lot of this is going to come out in those case studies that we do later today. We want to increase gender equality and representation through use of systemic assessment and monitoring frameworks, support the inclusion of gender and digital health guidelines or tools, and promote best practices that encourage equality throughout digital health programs. So this is what we've done so far this year. And, reflecting on this as a small volunteer working group, I'm really proud of all that we've done. So back in December, we had the idea to create this working group. And in January and February, we stormed and formed the co-chairs. So the co-chairs are Patty, Michelle, Steve Ellis, and myself. So that's when we were really kind of meeting together and putting our heads together about what we wanted this small working group to be. We had our first meeting in March this year, where we finalized our objectives and started sharing our initial thinking of resources. If you go back to that one of our activities and objectives, it was to understand better the landscape of existing working groups, and we were able to get some support from the Global Digital Health Network volunteer. There was a volunteer at the time who was helping us pull all this together. In April, we created a mini task force who conducted a review of existing literature, and she shared all of the resources that she found. And we also posted all of this to the Digital Square Wiki. So maybe someone can drop a link in the chat of where we've posted all these resources on the Digital Square Wiki. In May, we created a punchy checklist. We'll probably go over that later today, that can help the DH&I working group and other working groups more proactively and systemically include gender equity in their governance, planning, implementation, and assessment activities. June, we shared all of our progress to date, including that checklist, with the all-member DH&I group, which is, as you know, I think, 300 members strong. We've coordinated several abstracts over the summer and submitted them to the Global Digital Health Forum. And then today we're having our first ever gender deep dive in partnership with the Global Digital Health Network. Again, anyone is open to join this small working group. You do need to be a member of DH&I, but you're also welcome to join DH&I. So if you have questions about how to get involved in this small working group and you have passion and want to help us in going through and meeting these objectives, please join us. You're very welcome. All right, with that, we have gender terminology. Do we have Elizabeth on the line?
Elizabeth should have just joined via phone. So.
Okay, great.
Hello.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi. Apparently, being online 20 minutes before the start is not enough to avoid technical difficulties.
It's always good to have Plan B. We're really glad you could join.
Or C or D. Glad to be able to be here finally.
Okay, so we're running this on the fly in the traditional mode of adapting to our current systems. So I think what we'll do is, Elizabeth, if you can talk us through, and Amanda, can you continue to advance slides for Elizabeth?
I sure can. Elizabeth, we're on just kicking off the gender terminology section. Does that work?
Yes, were you, I'm assuming you weren't able to do the Menti.
No, we didn't do the Menti.
Okay, so I just sent the login to Erica. So she should be able to log into the Menti and be able to present so that people can fill out this poll.
So the one at the beginning of the gender terminology? Or should we go back to the
So,
one we're going to open with?
Let's see what time it is. Yeah, why don't we start with from the beginning?
All right, I think it's probably the same one. Can everyone see this here?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So if you've not used Menti before, this is really fun. It's a great way to kind of share some, rapid thoughts in a very nice co-creative way. So you can access it on your phone, you access it on the internet. So if you could just go to this website and enter this code, I am going to stop sharing my screen in just a moment because I want everyone to get a chance to get the code in. And then Erica, maybe you can share screen and we can go through the questions. Does that work? All right, I'm doing this on my phone. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing so that we can see the responses. Erica, you gonna be able to get yours up?
Yes, I am working on it. There we go. Can you all see the screen?
Yeah.
I think it's, are you seeing the whole screen or just the one screen?
You might want to expand your screen, like maximize your window.
Okay, got it. Is that better?
Much better, yeah.
Awesome. Right, yeah, so as we can see, we have mostly international NGO participants have joined. And then in second place, academic institutions. And a smattering of other individuals. This is great. This is really great to give us a sense of who you all are and what kind of background you have.
Was there another question, Erica? How do we move to?
Yeah, so.
Yeah, so there are
ahead.
3 questions. So if you think we have, I don't know how many participants are on the call right now, but if you think we've got a pretty good representation of who is here, we can move on to the next one to gauge people's familiarity with the topic.
Great. Okay, so is it the same code?
Yes, so you can, if I actually advance the slide, and now you should be able to, the participant should be able to answer the next question.
All right, it just came up for me.
Okay, awesome.
This is excellent participation. We have 70% participation in our polling. Let's make it 80.
Oh, that's very good.
So can everyone see the next question on the screen?
Yep, we can see it. Looks like we have a group that is fairly familiar with gender, which is great. And if you were one that answered that you're not familiar with gender, that is okay. That's why you're here, to learn.
%74%. We can do it. Let's hit 80. Last voters.
And Elizabeth, since I don't know if you're able to see the screen, but we have 52 participants here. And
Yes,
currently 37.
I'm able to see it.
Oh, okay, good.
I can't see your screen, but I'm logged on, so I can see the screen.
Okay.
All right,
I'm
looks
curious.
like we're stuck at 37. Should we go back to the slides, Elizabeth?
Well,
If there's
if
one
we
more
are,
question.
there is one more question, and the next question is the first question of the gender terminology. So we can advance to the next one. And here, if you just can put in one word or a couple of words as to what you think about when you hear the word gender, it will begin to form a word cloud. So if somebody puts something that you also think, you can write the same thing and it will make the word bigger in the word cloud.
I love watching this word cloud evolve. This is fantastic.
Yeah, I think this is one of the coolest Menti functions is seeing the word cloud form. And it's also great. We have a lot of really interesting responses. I can definitely see that we have people here who are quite familiar with gender. You know, we're not just seeing women and men, we're also seeing non-binary, spectrum of sexes, orientation, fluidity, patriarchy. So a lot of great ideas coming up here.
It's also interesting to note that we have over 100 participation on the dynamic word cloud as compared to the dynamic 1 to 5 scale. So it just shows that this visualization is far more interesting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think, you know, from a technological perspective, Menti has a lot of different ways of brainstorming. And I think if you really only want a couple of words as a response, this is a great way to do it because it easily, you know, it creates an exciting visual, but it also allows people to quickly see what thoughts are the most popular.
And I think
All right, maybe just give this
it's pretty popular through all of this. Seems like it's the one that's the biggest.
All right, so this is a lot of great brainstorming. So I think we can move back to the slides. And let's see. If you can start on the gender, versus sex slide. And so let me know if you are there.
I'm there. Can everyone see?
Great. All right, well, since I joined a bit abruptly, perhaps I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Elizabeth Arlotti Parrish. I'm a Senior Technical Advisor for Gender with JPIGO. And I imagine that you're familiar with JPIGO, and I'm imagining Erica has introduced herself already. But I work across all of our countries and all of our programs working to integrate gender and ensure that gender is being considered across a variety of maternal and child health, family planning, health worker training, digital technology, programs that run the spectrum. You know, within any program that we're doing, we need to be considering gender to ensure that we're meeting the needs of all of our populations and that their priorities are being addressed. So today we're going to talk a bit about what happens if we don't consider gender and what are some of the positive results when we do. And we're going to start off with some terminology. We can go through this rather quickly. I did see that people have a very high level of understanding, but I found it's very useful to go through the basics so that we're all speaking the same language. And because it's completely fine if you aren't very familiar with gender. No one expects people, a digital expert or a software developer to be an expert in gender. That's absolutely okay. So starting off, our most basic terminology is sex versus gender. When we talk about sex, we're talking about biological differences between male and female, mostly unchanging without surgery. When we talk about gender, we're talking about the social characteristics of being male or female or identifying somewhere else along the gender spectrum. That has to do with social norms, with expected gender characteristics that people associate with being a man or a woman, with the economic, social, political, and cultural implications of being male or female. And unlike sex, which is mostly unchanging without surgery, gender is socially constructed and changes over time and over place. And so why does this matter? You know, a lot of times when we're talking about gender, people think, women, what can we do to ensure that women, receive the same benefits as men? And that's a part of it, but it's not just women, right? We know that men and women have different needs in different places. For example, if we're thinking about technology constraints, it's going to be very different in Northern Cameroon, where women have low literacy, lower exposure to technology, and low asset ownership, compared to Lesotho, where girls actually have a greater educational experience because boys are often called upon to stay in the mountains for many months to herd their cattle. But also we're talking about, we have to understand that approaches for gender integration are not necessarily transferable. The things that may work great in one place don't work great in another place. And when we think about men versus women, we also have to understand that there are individuals who may not identify along this gender binary and may have unique constraints that impact their ability to access and use technology in positive ways in their lives. This is also where we start thinking about intersectionalities, right? It's not just about being a woman, but it's about being a rural woman or a 14-year-old girl versus a 45-year-old woman in terms of how they access technology, or it may be religion may play a role, culture may play a role, ethnicity may play a role. And so thinking about how all of these things interact within the programs that we work in. Next slide. And next we have this idea of equality versus equity. We saw that equity and equality were two of the biggest words that came up on the word cloud. And very simply, equality is the goal. We want all people of all genders to have equal opportunities and life chances. That doesn't necessarily mean that we do the same things for all people, but it means that the end result is the same for all people. And how do we get there? By using a process of equity, realizing that people have different constraints, and so they may have different needs so that everyone can reach the same goal. And just to note here, unfortunately, I can't see the screen or the chat box. So if people do have questions, feel free to type into the chat box or even unmute yourself and speak up. And the other facilitators can let me know if there is a question. Next slide. And so when we think about equity versus equality, there are a couple of images that you may have seen before that are pretty common in the gender space. This is the first one. We have this comic, serious teacher saying, for a fair selection, everyone has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. Right? This is an oversimplification of what a lot of people understand as equality. Everyone has the same inputs. Everyone has to do the same thing. Clearly, there are certain animals here who may have an easier time climbing the tree than other animals. But just because that's the case, it doesn't mean that those animals that can't climb a tree don't have other skills and don't have other strengths. And it also means that for those animals, climbing the tree may not be the right end result. So we need to think about the individual context, what people need, and what their end goal will be to reach a point when everyone has equal opportunities. Next slide. This is another representation that we often see when we're talking about equality versus equity. You may have also seen an image where you have people of different heights trying to pick fruit from a tree, right? The idea that people have different constraints and different barriers. So if we give everyone the same inputs, that may not get everyone to the same goal. So that isn't actually what we mean by equality. It's not about giving everyone the same thing. Rather, we want everyone to be able to have the same opportunity, in this case, watching the soccer game. And so we realize that people have different needs to reach that goal. And that's where the process of equity comes in. giving people what they need or working with people to achieve their needs so that they can all have the same opportunities at the end. Next slide. We also have this third idea. Here it's called justice. The idea that with equity, we are working with people to ensure that they can overcome their specific barriers. But there's another level, which is that we can also work to remove the barriers themselves. Right here, we're no longer giving the kid a box so we can see over the fence, or see over the wall. We're actually removing the wall and replacing it with a fence, so now no one has a barrier and no one needs those additional inputs. In our work, oftentimes we fall in the equity box. We may not be able to remove the barrier itself, but we can at least work to ensure that everyone has what they need to be able to reach the end goal. But if we can also think critically about how can we go beyond equity towards justice? How can we not just give people what they need to remove barriers, but how can we actually work at dismantling those barriers themselves? I'll pause here for a few seconds to see if anyone has any questions or comments.
Oh, we've got one comment that just came in. Karen asking, the equality, equity, justice slide is great. Is it okay to borrow it, and does it need any copyright acknowledgements?
It is fine to borrow it. If you could acknowledge JPyGo, that would be great.
Awesome. Any other questions while we pause for a moment? But do feel free to type them in, and we'll get to them as they come. All right, that's a
Great.
3 count. I don't see anything else coming in. Why don't you go ahead and proceed? Thank you, Elizabeth.
Great. Next slide. All right, our next slide is gender integration versus gender mainstreaming. In some ways, this is really semantics, but again, it's important for everyone to be speaking the same language, particularly because I feel like when you begin to talk to your teams and use these words, people's eyes glaze over. It's like, what do you mean by mainstreaming? That's not even a real word. What are we talking about? So here's what we're talking about. At a very simple level, if we're talking about gender integration, we're talking about programs. How do we include gender in program design, implementation, monitoring and evaluation to ensure that gender is being considered? So generally, integration is programmatic. When we talk about mainstreaming, we're talking about organizational culture. How do we integrate gender into our organizational policies, strategies, administrative functions, institutional culture? All of that is gender mainstreaming. Oftentimes, you'll hear these words used interchangeably, but at their base level, this is what we mean. We're talking about programmatic integration and organizational mainstreaming. And when we get to our case study activity in a little while, some of the groups will find that their case studies have to do with gender integration into programs, and some may find that their case studies have to do with gender mainstreaming into organizational culture. Next slide. And when we talk about gender and how we include gender in our work, this is an overarching term, gender sensitive. What does it mean for a program or a process or an organization to be gender sensitive? And here you have this definition. It's a program or a process or an organization that considers the constraints, opportunities, and life circumstances pertaining to individuals of different genders, while at the same time aiming to eliminate inequalities and promote gender equality, including an equal distribution of resources. So here we see, if you think back to the soccer slide, we are starting with equity. We're acknowledging that people of different genders have different constraints, and we want to address that. But we're also aiming to move beyond that equity idea and actually eliminate the inequalities to get to this end goal of equality. And so I think, before I came on and throughout this presentation, we're going to be talking about what can the Digital Health Network do to ensure gender-sensitive programming and gender-sensitive projects and gender-sensitive organizational culture. Next slide. All right, and so our last terminology slide has a lot going on. This is the gender integration continuum. It's from the Interorganizational Gender Working Group. Yes, IGWG, and it's been used for a long time. And here you see a continuum. And this generally refers to programs. On one hand, we can think about programs that are gender blind. And on the other hand, we have programs that are gender aware. A gender blind program is a program that doesn't even consider gender. There's a certain population that the people are working with, and everyone in the population is treated the same way. There's no differentiation, thinking about the constraints of people of different genders or the intersectionality between gender and other social cultural characteristics. The opposite of that is being gender aware, which is at the very least recognizing that people of different genders may have different constraints and different opportunities, different priorities and different goals, and thinking about how a project can address those. If a program is gender blind, it can unintentionally be what we call exploitative, which is a program that reinforces or takes advantage of gender inequalities and stereotypes. Once a program becomes gender aware, we hope to move along the continuum towards a program that's accommodating or even transformative. And I'll give some examples of all of those. When we talk about a program that's accommodating, this program recognizes that there are different constraints facing individuals of different genders and works within those constraints to help individuals reach their goals. This is that equity idea. We recognize that there is this wall and people are going to have different abilities of looking over that wall. So we're going to ensure that everyone has the right number of boxes to be able to see over the wall. A very common example for a gender accommodating program within maternal and child health is looking at antenatal care. In many countries, women may not have the decision-making power to come to antenatal care on their own. They're influenced by their husbands, they're influenced by their mothers-in-law, they may lack resources for transportation, they may lack information about why antenatal care is important. And so an accommodating program, knowing that husbands have power within a family, may decide to implicate husbands in antenatal care programming. Husbands receive information, husbands are encouraged to accompany their partners to attend antenatal care, husbands are encouraged to give their wives money for transport, so that way they can attend antenatal care services. In this type of situation, we see that the power imbalance doesn't change. It's still the husband that has the power in the household. However, the program is working within that power inequality to ensure that the end goal of women being able to access services is achieved. And at its base, there's nothing wrong with that type of program. You may be working for a health program. The goal of the health program is to increase antenatal care uptake. You're becoming successful. But we do have to be careful when reinforcing existing inequalities may cross over from accommodating into becoming exploitative. And we also see that example with regard to antenatal care services. Many of these programs that implicate husbands have also tried the strategy where if a husband comes with a wife to a clinic to seek services, the providers may prioritize the couples that come together to receive services first. It encourages husbands to participate. They know that men have a lot of other obligations, working in the field or working in business. And so they want to reward the couples that come together. And they're seen first. The women that come alone are left to wait until the couples are seen. People may see this as accommodating, but in fact, it can veer over into exploitative as it reinforces that a man has greater value in the clinic than a woman does who's alone. It reinforces inequalities and vulnerabilities, as there may be reasons why women come alone. They may not have partners. They may not have positive relationships with their partners such that they could ask their partner to come with them. There may be other issues that we don't understand. And as a result, those women who are alone are being deprioritized in favor of the ones who are there with their partners. So while a program can become accommodating, we do have to be careful that we're not negatively reinforcing inequalities within gender norms and power imbalances within households or communities. The ideal in this continuum, where we all hope to become, is in this transformative area. And if you think back to the soccer example, the transformative area is where we're thinking about justice, not just helping people overcome their barriers, but actually changing the barriers themselves, changing norms, changing systems, and changing power structures so that these equity-based accommodations may no longer be necessary. Now, we know every program cannot be gender transformative, and that's okay. However, one, we do want to ensure they're at least not exploitative, but two, also we want people to start thinking, how can we push our programs along this continuum? Because there are many ways where you can have a transformative program without any extra cost if you had already planned to do an accommodating program. For example, if you are training healthcare providers in family planning skills, for example, contraceptive technology, you're already planning a training, you already are developing curriculum, you are already, creating job aids, et cetera, et cetera. You can create a job aid that shows a picture of male doctors supervising female nurses, or you can create a picture of female doctors supervising male nurses. You can do case studies where all the leadership is male and all the subordinates are female, or you can create situations where the power structure is mixed gender and the interactions between them are more equitable. You can create messaging for communities where a woman is at the clinic by herself, or a woman is caring for her baby, or you can show imagery where a husband and wife, or two women, or two men are caring for children together. There are small things that we can do to push along this transformation, along this continuum towards transformation that may not have any extra cost or any extra effort. So as we begin to discuss the case studies, this is one of the things we're going to be looking at, is in situations that we face in our work, how can we identify potentially exploitative situations, but also how can we take an activity that may be only accommodating and push it towards transformation. And I think I'll stop here for questions.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. This was really, really informative. So do please go ahead and type your questions in as you have them. We do have one question that's come in already. This was from Lorena back on the slide where we were discussing equality, equity, and justice. The question was, are there any tools you would recommend to determine the levels of support needed? Absolutely. There are many, many, many. I think for a start, I would recommend gender analysis. And here also, let me interject that this is only a very basic overview on what we're talking about with regard to gender. There's so many other resources out there, and JPIGO has many that we can share if you're more interested in thinking critically about how to integrate gender into your programs, if you're interested in training your colleagues or your country teams in thinking about gender, please do reach out and we can discuss that in greater detail. But to answer this question, a great strategy is using gender analysis. And gender analysis is exactly what it sounds like. It's any type of study, which can be a data collection, which could be examining literature and looking at secondary data. It could be anything as simple as talking to your staff or talking to your communities, where very specific questions are asked about the gender-related barriers to achieving goals. JPIGO uses a gender analysis framework, which is based on USAID's framework, which is based on kind of internationally accepted frameworks, which looks at barriers along the dimensions of beliefs and perceptions, access to assets, political structures and policies, and behaviors. And thinking about along those four domains, what kind of barriers exist and what opportunities exist for individuals of different genders.
And if you're interested in looking more closely at something like that, there are many, many tools that we can share. JPIGO has an excellent gender analysis toolkit that's all online. It's available for anyone. I can, once I turn it over to the next facilitator, I can send the link to them and they can put it in the chat box that has sample questionnaires, that has sample exploratory questions for teams to think about, as they're thinking about how to integrate gender into their programs.
And Elizabeth, this is Patty. We had, as part of the small working group on gender, as part of the DH&I, kind of taken that recommendation and did an adaptation of a kind of like checklist kind of questionnaire for gender analysis for digital health programs and the working group itself.
Yes, and so I have seen that checklist, and looking at it, I feel like it's an excellent checklist for, in this particular context, it looked like it was looking at gender mainstreaming. So thinking about how is an organization becoming gender sensitive and moving along that continuum. I'll also say that there are tools that build off of that type of content that the sub-working group was looking at. A very good one is from CARE. There may be representatives from CARE on the line. They do have a gender marker tool, which allows teams to programmatically examine where they are in terms of integrating gender into their programs. The Health Policy Program Plus has a gender integration toolkit, which looks at both programs as well as this idea of mainstreaming gender into organizational culture, where a team sits together and answers questions and then can give themselves a score.
Yeah.
And based on that score, they can figure out, what they need to do to advance.
Yeah, no, and I think what was interesting for us was, as we were going through our exploration in this whole area, is the need to kind of figure out like where you are and then plan for and strategize for how you want to get to where you want to be, and then using the tools as well to measure progress over time.
Absolutely. And I will say, in my experience, a lot of people look at gender and think it's going to be a very hard sell, right? With communities, with their teams, with governments. But in fact, once we get past this barrier of not speaking the same language, of not understanding exactly what we're talking about, people are usually very interested because people realize that these barriers do exist and they are critical to ensuring that people can get the benefits that they need, that people can have the same opportunities. So I think once you get past that first step, people are very interested and very open in diving deeper into the practicalities of what gender-related barriers exist and how they can work to address them.
All right, Erica has posted the gender analysis toolkit. So thank you, Erica. You got a thank you from Gabriella for pointing out the risk of just doing gender accommodating work. So that's excellent. If there's nobody else here, we'll move on to the next session. Amanda, could I ask you to go ahead and advance just to the next slide? Great. Okay. So thank you for the presentation, Elizabeth. That was really, really great. And again, we'll give you a special award for being the most determined to get into your webinar, despite the fact that we made it very difficult for you. So you'll get something in the mail from us. For now, I just want to go into the next session and just have a little bit of a group discussion on our experiences with gender-sensitive programming. So if you all want to would like to raise your hands, you can use the reaction function. We can take people off mute and let people share their experiences. But really wanted to have people share their everyday experiences as far as what's worked and what hasn't worked. So some positive examples where gender has been positively integrated into your work, and some not so positive examples or experiences that people have had. So feel free to raise your hand if you've got something you'd like to contribute. And that reactions button is down, should be down at the bottom of your screen, of your Zoom screen. We should have done an interactive word cloud. Then we'd have a lot of things. Elizabeth, do you have an example that maybe you could share? Or I can kick it over to Patty or Amanda to share an example.
Sure. What kind of example are you looking for? Sorry.
Sure. Either a positive or not so positive example of how gender was addressed as in a program or in an organization. So where gender was not considered, or it was considered, and it worked well.
I think one of
sure,
the
I can give you an.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think one of the ones that I've been recently like really impressed by is the the government of Ethiopia has set out to across the board, not just in like health information systems and digital health, to have equitable gender representation and really support gender equity and equality in all facets of social development. And so they've included it very proactively in a national scale up of their health information systems program. They did an assessment, they've developed a strategy, and they're now kind of like working towards the achievement of the goals that they've set out for themselves. And they've looked at, everything from the academic institutions and where are kind of like, women and men in terms of learning programs and curricula, to where are they being included in program design and implementation throughout the board. And I think it's like a really, great example. I know someone recently shared that Jordan had done something similar. And so I think we're starting to see some really positive experiences, at least starting with representation. So just getting equitable representation, but then also really looking at some of the underlying challenges and barriers to, men and women's participation in different, levels of activities when it comes to digital health and health information systems.
Great. All right, I'm not seeing any hands come up here. Thank you, Patty. I think the question was in the chat. You can feel free to type it in as well. Elizabeth or Amanda, do you all have an example you'd like to share?
Yeah, I have a couple of examples. The first one is not digital health related, and it's actually not even health related, but it's an interesting example about really what considering gender means, and ties into kind of this very popular idea now with human-centered design, which from a gender perspective, we like to say we have been doing that for quite some time, right? Gender analysis is human-centered design. It's going in and asking people what their priorities are, what they need, what is constraining them, and how they think it can be addressed. And so my first example is what happens when you don't do that. So this is another very common example that you hear. This is not from a program I worked on, but from the agricultural and natural resource perspective. There's a very well-known example where we know that one of the major issues, we'll say, for women in terms of their time availability and in terms of their safety is traveling to collect water. Right? Women are often the ones responsible for collecting water for cooking, for household sanitation, and for household use. And they often have to walk very far to collect water. This takes up a lot of time. It leaves them less time for things such as accessing health services, their own business, taking care of other household chores, taking care of children. And it also can be a safety risk as you see women at an increased risk of sexual assault as they're traveling long distances from their homes to collect water to bring back for use. So there's an example of a program who had been working to drill wells and put in water pumps within villages, saying that, you know, if we can create a source of water that's within the village, it will be easier for women to access water. They'll have a lot more free time. It will allow them to, you know, work on their businesses, to stay with their families, to access healthcare, to do all these other things. So really, by removing this one barrier, we can have a lot of other positive benefits. And so the program invested quite a bit of resources to dig pumps, water pumps, within the village. And after they installed these pumps, they had their big ceremony to open them up. And, you know, after a few months, they found that the pumps weren't being used. You know, even though there were these pumps that delivered clean water within the village, women were still going out, walking long distances to get water from the river, bringing it back. And so, you know, the program team went out and talked to some people and, you know, asked some women why they weren't using the water pumps. And the response that they got was that, you know, this time when they would go and collect water was the only time in their entire day when they had an escape from their work. The women would go together, they would have time to chat with each other, to be away from their household, to be away from their household responsibilities, you know, and it was actually a really restorative time for them to go out, you know, away from the village, collect the water and bring it back. So despite the fact that it was seen, you know, despite the fact that the project team thought they were really considering gender issues, they didn't take that extra step of actually consulting with women, consulting with people to figure out what their needs were. And they ended up creating something that wasn't useful for the people they were trying to help. And so the moral of that story is do a gender analysis and talk to your communities because they're the experts in this situation.
Yeah, I can piggyback on that. I think Patty mentioned it in the chat, but this book, I think the Zoom, can you see Invisible Women, is a fantastic book with lots of anecdotal stories, a lot of data about leaving mostly sexist segregated data and leaving, you know, the gender out of the design of activities and how that has impacted anything from agriculture to health to transportation. One of the examples that really stood out to me, it's not a health example, was in one of the Scandinavian countries. They decided that, and when it was snowing and like it was raining and the roads were really bad in the winter, to flip and clear the sidewalks first and then clear the roads. The reasoning by clearing the sidewalks first, people using the sidewalks, you know, they would have fewer accidents, and it's mostly women who are using the sidewalks, so women walking to the store, women with their prams, and then cleaning the roads. On the roads, it was mostly men using the roads, driving to work, and they saw accidents, you know, like emergency room and hospital accidents and injuries plummet just by clearing the sidewalks first. And then clearing the roads. Another example in the book that's a bit of a digital example is mapping. You know how we go to Google Maps and we're trying to find the fastest place to go, or we want to avoid the tolls. And I can't remember what the project was, but there was no safe, how to get from point A to point B safely. And a lot of, if it was someone walking, could be any city in the world or any region in the world, how to get from point A to point B safely, especially if you were a woman going alone and it was in the evening. So just another plug for Invisible Women. If you have not read this book, it's by Caroline Criado Perez. I think everyone will really enjoy it.
All right.
And maybe just in our
Go
next
ahead, Elizabeth.
minute, just to add one more thing to think about, which is a huge topic, but it does have a particular digital importance, which is thinking about digital adaptations in the time of COVID and the gender implications of that. And I'm sure all of you are seeing this in your work, you know, so are we. But there's just so many facets to consider, you know, everything from as we move the activities that would be done in person to an online format or to a virtual format, you know, how are we considering the gender digital divide and differing levels of literacy and comfort, as well as differing access and ownership of digital devices, and the kind of impact that's going to have on people's advancement, between professional trainings and children in education, a household that only has maybe one computer and multiple children that may prioritize male education over female education, or in the case of Lesotho, the reverse, right, and girls' education over boys' education. And then also thinking about the data, all of this data that's coming in for COVID and the implications if we're not disaggregating by gender, if we're not disaggregating by age, and also how are we gathering that data? If we're doing SMS or mobile surveys, are we even reaching the most vulnerable people who may not have access to a mobile phone, who may live in rural areas, who are predominantly women, or who are sharing phones with their partner or with their siblings or with their parents or with their friends, right? And just thinking about what data are we missing and how that's impacting our decision making.
And just to add to that, Elizabeth, in one of my early sort of like mHealth design and implementations, I remember working with nurses in clinics on a community case management mobile phone resource. And the first thing they would do is like hand the phone to a younger male, colleague in the clinic. Like they did not want to like use the technology at all. And I remember just being like kind of like a really kind of early eye-opening, fail fast and forward to really think about like what is, like what do they need? How do they need it to fit into their day-to-day like life and work? And how do you design kind of around their comfort levels and preferences, et cetera.
And if I'll jump in if I can. I know we probably are getting time to move to the next section, but I thought maybe kind of piggybacking off of that too as well. There was a project at CRS, also kind of in the earlier days of mHealth, an agriculture project where they gave laptops to agriculture extension workers. Just similar to community health workers, they go out into the community to meet farmers, teach them new planting techniques, and inform them of fertilizers or pesticides or what have you. So, and they used a laptop to, actually these were netbooks, if anyone remembers netbooks, kind of the hybrid, I guess, or the phase before tablets became popular. But they gave everyone a netbook to capture their information. And they were female and male extension workers. And so this was an unintentional, there was no, this was not planned, there was no gender consideration involved, it planned ahead of time. But unintentionally what happened, the unintentional side effect was that the netbook, the mini laptop, for anyone who remembers this, it actually gave the female extension workers more credibility. They were treated with more respect than because they had a computer. And so this again was maybe in the, definitely 10 years ago when I did this project. It's about 8 years ago when I did this project and learned about this. So, and this was, I think somewhere in the I forget the lake, one of the lake regions in near Uganda. So they did not plan for accommodating gender in any way at all, but it had this unintentional side effect of elevating the women because they had a computer, and so they must, I guess they were treated with, with that respect. Over.
Great. Thank you. Really appreciate that. And we've come over the first hour, and we still have 80% of our participants here with us, so that's great. Thanks again for the presenters. It's clear that there's a lot of interest in this topic, and we kept everybody engaged. Now we are going to go into the more interactive portion of the presentation. We're going to actually break down into 4 breakout sessions and go through some case studies. We'll talk through those for about 30 minutes, and then we'll come back to regroup. Elizabeth will take us through some more slides, and we'll regroup and see how we can all move forward. So actually, I made a small change. I did pre-assign people to the breakout sessions, just so people didn't have to pick and get lost wandering around. We have 4 sessions. There is one on developers, one on leadership, one on data and research, and one on frontline health workers. So we'll be going through a case study, and then in each case study, we will talk it through and just look at some of the questions. So trying to apply some of the new information for some of us or existing information to see if this program is gender exploitative, accommodating, transformative, and how did we know? And then if there are ways that this could be improved, so if in fact it was not gender transformative, how could we change or adapt the program to make it gender transformative? So that will be what we're doing. As I mentioned, we did pre-assign the rooms, but don't worry, you're not stuck there. Patty will take one room, Erica will take a room, Alice will take a room, and I will take a room. If you don't like your room because you got stuck with me, you can feel free to send a note to the to leave the room and send a note to the moderator, and we can get you into another room. One thing I did want to point out is that as you, if you do want to change rooms, please click exit the room, not exit the meeting. We would like you to stay in the meeting, but would prefer that you not accidentally leave the entire meeting. So as you are leaving the meeting or leaving your room, please click exit room and not exit meeting. So I hope that is clear. We will go ahead and make the assignments now. You should see something pop up on your screen that tells you you're transitioning to a breakout room. So we will be making that assignment. Christina will become the host, and then we will come back in about 30 minutes. So thank you very much. I'm now going to open the rooms.
Hi, David. Oh. Lauren, I see you're still here. Would you like to go to a breakout room?
I just sent you a chat, Christina.
Oops, sorry. Hi, David. I see you just joined us. We are in breakout rooms now. Would you like to go to a breakout room? Let me assign you to one. Hi, Tina. I see that you are not in a breakout room. Would you like to? Oh.
All right. Looks like we are filtering back from our breakout groups. Um, I hope that was useful discussions for everybody here. Sorry, just working on the technology here. We got 35 people coming back. This is great.
Did you lose anybody, Steve? Did anybody opt out of your room?
I was just so focused on the discussion, I chose not to notice.
There you go.
But this is really fantastic. I mean, we got 35 people back into the room, so people have really stuck with us. I know there's a lot going on in the middle of the week. People wrestling different time zones, so this is really tremendous that everyone has stuck with us. So thank you for contributing. Let's see if we've got Elizabeth back. Elizabeth, there you are. You have a name now instead of a phone number. Back. It's lovely.
Oh, huh. I'm
But
still only on by phone, but.
Yeah, you know.
I changed it.
Oh, good.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Erica. All right, good. Well, thank you all again for these sessions. Elizabeth is going to take us through the next few steps, and then Amanda will wrap us up. So thanks again, and thanks Elizabeth for taking us forward.
Great. So if we could go to the slide that says the dangers of being gender blind.
We are there, Elizabeth. Just tell me when to advance.
Great. All right. So what we're going to do in this section is just have a bit of a discussion. I think in our case studies, we began to see what the risks are if we don't consider gender. And that's what we mean by being gender blind, is we're not considering gender. You often hear people say not using a gender lens, right? But that's another term that sounds a bit jargony. Like, what do we mean by this gender lens? What it means is we're not considering gender in our program. So what could happen, when we don't consider gender? And so we're going to do a bit of brainstorming. With 35 people, that's not too many, so I hope to have some active participation at this point. We're going to start off going back to menti.com. You can advance the slide. And Erica, if you could share the screen for the Mentimeter. And the question is up: what could happen if a digital health program does not consider gender? This is not a word cloud, so you don't have to put your responses in one-word answers. You can just write some statements. What kinds of things could happen if a program does not consider gender?
Can you reshare the code again?
Yeah.
Oh, never mind.
Yes, and the code should be on top of the image that you see. It's 8617384.
Yeah. No, we got some rain on the last day.
We could just ask everyone to go on mute. We're getting a bit of feedback. Thanks.
Good times. Oh, yeah.
All right, I've got a few things coming up. Please don't be shy. This is all anonymous. We've got 11, 16. That's pretty good. You can get others to respond. And I changed the settings so you can submit more than once. So if you have other ideas, please do put in additional comments. Give it another minute or so.
29 out of 36, 33. All right, let's hit 36. Let's go over 100%. Vote early and often.
All right, we're over 100%. That's what I like to see. And so I think, Erica, you should be able to scroll down so that people can see the other statements. But we generally, it feels like we have some kind of general themes here. We have a lot of people saying that, you know, it can do harm instead of good. It can make the problem worse instead of better, risk people's safety and privacy, perpetuate inequality and unfairness. So it can really make the problem worse. That's the first situation. Also, we have issues where we may not be meeting the needs of the people we're trying to help. People may not be getting the full experience of the program, will lack participation from women or from the key populations. I'm trying to scroll down, but oh, there we go. Perpetuating inequality, perpetuating power imbalances, perpetuating patriarchy, further entrenching inequalities. It's a short-term solution rather than a sustainable one, which is great. Not a great situation, but a great response. Also, we have a theme here that the program's going to fall short of its goal, which is a very good point, which is that we want to integrate gender because it's the right thing to do, right? And we believe that people should have equal opportunities, and we believe that power imbalances bring injustice, and we do believe all of these things. But also from a practical perspective, if we're not meeting the needs of our program population, we're not going to meet our goals. We're not going to meet our targets, we're not going to achieve our results, and our donors are not going to be happy. So there really is a practical component to integrating gender. The reason we ask these questions is so that we can have a program that's most effective at meeting its goals. All right, we can stay on the Mentimeter slide for now, but I'd love to open the floor to people to continue the conversation either from earlier or to continue the conversation from the case studies. You know, what did you see about the risks of being gender blind? And how can we overcome this? What can we do to ensure that we're not gender blind to avoid these risks? So feel free to type into the chat box, or we're a small enough group now, feel free to unmute and share your thoughts.
This is Amanda. I would really like to hear from the developers group about your discussion and how to support gender awareness. Anyone from that group?
Hi, this is Alice, and I was the one who facilitated that group. So we had a great discussion. Anyone from the group, would you like to offer some of the same observations you shared in the group, or any other thoughts or reactions?
Just in terms of you know, what could happen if a digital health program does not consider gender, you know, in a software development team. So this is more the team members more than the beneficiaries of a program. One of the key things is that you could lose out on very valuable ideas and skills by having a culture that only includes male perspectives and sort of excludes women for various reasons that we discussed in the group.
I was also in the group, and one question that I started thinking about just at the end is, especially as we're thinking about the folks who work at an organization or we're trying to support, how do we think about a gender lens, without also thinking about the intersections of other oppressions? And perhaps this is a uniquely American problem at the moment, but you know, I think a gender lens has often been misused to just think about white women, and we know that disparities and treatment and sometimes gender has been used to just promote the rights of white women. And we're seeing this, I think, across everywhere. So I'm curious about how we also think about intersections, if it's race, ability, sexuality. I think in some ways, I'd also like to push back that we're missing a little bit of the picture, and sometimes just thinking about women really means white women or white able-bodied straight cis women. And so I'm curious about how we also think about race, especially right now in this question.
Thanks. That's an excellent, excellent comment. I mean, I think, well, first I'll say that this is certainly not a uniquely American problem. It manifests itself differently in different countries, but, you know, in other countries, we may be talking about caste and the intersection of caste and gender. We may be talking about rural communities versus urban communities. We're certainly talking about age and the unique barriers facing young people. And young people doesn't just mean young women, it means young men and the barriers facing each of those groups. We're talking about, you know, we're not just talking about women, we're talking about people who identify across the gender spectrum and the different barriers facing individuals who may not identify as male or female, and particularly if they're also an ethnic minority or, you know, have another intersectional identity, which can lead to oppression. And I think this is very important. And it took a long time for the development community and, I don't know, beyond the development community, it took a long time for people to become comfortable thinking about gender. And even that, I can't say that we're there yet. And everyone is considering gender in all of the work that we do. But because people are becoming more comfortable talking about gender, and our donors and international leadership have begun to prioritize gender, this is an excellent entry point to begin discussing other types of inequalities, and, you know, reminding people that gender, one, doesn't just mean white women, and two, all women or all men are not facing the same types of barriers because of these intersectionalities. It's a complicated question, but, you know, the first step is starting that conversation.
And maybe I'll just add, because it came up in the discussion, just the story is actually, the case was a real case based on my experience and my friend of mine when we both worked in the tech sector. So it's not as, I don't know if it's as quite the same if you're working in a you know, a digital health company that's let's say a social enterprise working on whether it's like an organization that works on mobile health applications or EMRs or what have you. But my imagination is probably a little bit kinder in that in the development sector, but there may be elements of this. But that experience is based on my Silicon Valley experience.
Mm-hmm. And that gets back to this idea of gender integration versus gender mainstreaming, right? I mean, we know, or we can imagine what happens when all of the leaders in an industry are all white men, or are all white men with certain backgrounds, right? It has an impact both in the types of program, content, and products that are developed, and it also has a social impact. You know, can the industry evolve if there's no possibility of anyone outside that demographic to have a leadership role, to influence decision making, and to, you know, to prioritize bringing in others, you know, who share this diversity. And I think Erica has a good example about that she introduced to me when we were first having this conversation about gender and digital health.
Yeah, there's another resource that was developed called I'd Blush If I Could by UNESCO and the Equals Global Partnership. And it's a document and I guess initiative on closing gender divides in digital skills through education. But the I'd Blush If I Could title comes from an example in which developers initially, when they were creating Siri, they, you know, and this it's a female voice, and the habit of having all male developers typically create the assistants as a woman or a female voice. This is when they were first being developed. When Siri was called a harsh name or a derogatory term, she would respond, "I'd blush if I could." That's what they had her say initially. And so as you can see, this is, you know, alarming when you have only one perspective or male developers on one side, and then not allowing for that female perspective. So it's interesting. It's an interesting example that I really like to point to a lot, because it's so indicative of that diversity needed on the development side that we need.
And I think,
yeah, and I would say the same holds true to, you know, with this idea about
go ahead.
the intersectionalities, you know, in development and in leadership. I mean, we've seen, I think we've all seen stories about AI and facial recognition technology and the differing, you know, a lot of, well, previously perhaps facial recognition technologies had a harder time differentiating facial features of Black men and women, and, you know, compared to white men and women. And, you know, there was a thing that came out in the US a while ago looking at mapping faces of America's Most Wanted, and they identified the faces as the Black members of Congress, because there wasn't a differentiation, potentially imagining how the software was developed, you know, and the priorities of those developers compared to what may have been the case if the development team was more diverse. You know, this really does have significant implications in society, you know, moving society forward, and also continuing to reinforce barriers and stereotypes and, you know, dangerous social practices.
Well, I think what's interesting is that, like, we still have Siri, who's a woman. We still have Alexa, who's a woman. We still have, and the origins is that, like, there's no way, like, a man would tell another man what to do, but would feel very comfortable telling a woman what to do. And that's sort of the genesis of where these voices came from, and why they're female voices. And but I think it's, you know, it's still very interesting that, like, we know this, but, like, nothing is changing. Like, there isn't enough, like, outrage or activism to engage more women in these processes and make sure that these things either get corrected and, you know, and or done better moving forward.
Absolutely. And there are, you know, when you think about what can we possibly do, there are a couple of different approaches. Right? One is we can think about, well, we have our group of white male developers. Can we, at the very least, you know, conduct trainings on gender and unconscious bias and cultural implications of technology and these sorts of things to get people thinking about different ways in which their work can have an impact on society? Absolutely. As a first step, there are a million resources out there. We should absolutely be doing that. But also, how can we get more women in leadership? How can we facilitate women being the decision makers, and Black women being the decision makers, and women of lower castes being the decision makers, and, you know, changing this, not just changing attitudes, but actually changing the makeup of these processes. You know, there's a lot of different levels at which change can happen. And it may seem overwhelming, but we don't have to do everything at once. We should look at it as an opportunity, that there are many different entry points, and any of those entry points can have an impact. All right, as we look at our time, before we move on to the last component, I'll just give, you know, one more minute to anyone who has any final comments or questions on this discussion.
Yeah, and part of it is, yeah.
All right, can you advance, well, one slide? You know, why does integration matter in digital health? Pretty much this is all what we've talked about already. You know, we've talked about the importance of diversity in leadership. We've talked about the importance of diversity in programming, the role of understanding people's needs and how those needs are different between men and women and people of other gender identities. We've talked about the fact that this integrating gender will actually help us meet our program goals and our intended results, which will help us get additional funding and continue our programs. And finally, it's the right thing to do. And I do like to mention that. I mean, you know, we try to be as practical as possible. And when we're introducing the idea of gender to groups that may not be as open, we definitely want to lead with this idea that it's going to give us more positive results, right? Gender is a means to an end. And in this case, the end is selling more product or getting more clients or increasing health usage or whatever it is. But gender is also an end unto itself. Gender equality is something we all strive for, right? So if we can also achieve that, if we can also begin to, you know, create more equity and decrease power imbalances, that's important. And that's as important as these more programmatic outcomes. So I do think it's important to bring both sides in when we're having this discussion about gender integration. So can we go to the next slide? So taking action. So we really appreciate everyone's participation today and hope that it has been a learning experience for everyone. But this wasn't just organized as a learning experience, right? We're not just here to gain information and then take it away. We're also here as a call to action to say, with all this information that we have, what can we do to take this forward? Next slide. So we have a question for you. What is one concrete action that this group, GDHN, can take to integrate gender into digital health programming? Concrete, practical, it doesn't have to be big, it can be as small as possible, but we want to do, again, a bit of brainstorming for how we're going to move this process forward. And because technology is fun, we are going to do some digital brainstorming using Google Jamboard. So if someone can put the Jamboard into the chat box, and everyone can put this into their, into their browser, and you'll see the Jamboard. And then if you look on the side of the Jamboard, there are all these icons, and right below the arrow, there is a sticky note. Let's see, it says I need to make it open to everyone, which it should be. 1 second. Let's see. Okay, it should be changed so anyone with the link can now add on. And so you'll see right below the arrow, there's a sticky note. So we're going to be doing some virtual flip chart brainstorming here. So if everyone can just put one idea, what is one thing we can do as the Global Digital Health Network to increase gender integration? And you should be able to see on your own screen as people put up sticky notes. But you can also, we can also share the screen as well.
I'm sharing. Can everyone see it?
Yeah, we sure can, Amanda. And just wanted to contribute for my personal, some of my personal thoughts. We talked about this a little bit in the group. Is excited to see things that we can do big and small in our work. There's obviously a lot of organizational and cultural transformation that needs to occur, but also really be great to have some things that we can all take on in our day-to-day lives, our day-to-day projects, so that it's not just a big problem that is going to take years to address, but is something that we can both advocate for, but also take in some small steps in our day-to-day lives.
All right, so I did make it editable, but we'll see if the technology fails. I think Erica's going to reshare the link and see if you can now edit it. Oh, there we go.
Okay, great.
Great. We've got 5 post-its coming up. Please don't be shy, just one idea. And you'll all be able to, anytime that you want to come into this link, you'll be able to see the post-its. And I think the link will also be integrated into the presentation when it's shared. So it'll be very easy to refer back to this brainstorming. All right, maybe take one more minute. Got some great ideas here. Include gender discussions and trainings for my entire team throughout the year. Do a gender orientation for our organization staff. Periodically report on gender equity to our members. Encourage gender analysis and strategies for programming leadership and content focus. Reach out to groups like Girls Who Code, Akira, Chicks, etc., to involve in GDHN. And that's actually a really great point, is that as an organization and as a network, you don't have to do everything, right? There are many organizations with a lot of great experience in gender integration. So those partnerships are a key component of reaching gender transformative programming, is realizing that we don't have to do everything ourselves. And include gender analysis in all project monitoring, include data on gender. I will say that's huge. I love data. People look at gender and they think it's this fuzzy thing that can't be measured, but that's completely untrue. You can measure changes in gender equity. You can measure changes in attitudes. You can measure changes in violence. You can look at gender disaggregated data as the most basic thing to see if men and women of different ages are receiving services equally. Consider gender explicitly as a lens in HCD activity. Excellent. Consider feminist design as a framework. Excellent. You know, if we're thinking about a feminist design framework, I would certainly suggest that everyone head over to Global Affairs Canada's page on their feminist development policy. I think it's something we can all aspire to. The government of Canada has decided that any development programming has to be based on a feminist agenda. And so there's some excellent language there about what that looks like. All right, there's a lot of great brainstorming. This Jamboard is still open, feel free to continue, but I'm gonna turn it over to the other facilitators for closing and next steps.
All right. So, wow, what a great session. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation, for your engagement. We hope that this was fun and informative for you all. Do encourage you to take a look at these resources. I'm looking at a lot of things were shared in the chat, so make sure to capture all of that. Please also join the small working group on gender through the Digital Health and Interoperability Working Group. If you're interested, you're very welcome. I think most importantly to take forward is to take these learnings, take what you discussed today, have a conversation with a colleague, grab a virtual coffee, talk a little bit about what you learned, how you can incorporate gender more thoughtfully in your digital health work. And also want to thank all of our facilitators today. A huge thank you to Elizabeth for walking us through all of this. This is fantastic. A thanks to our case study gurus, Patty, Erica, Alice, and Steve. And thanks to everyone in the Gender Small Working Group for all of your contributions. A lot of folks were doing work behind the scenes, like Sherry Haas, to get us to this point today. So I will close there and wish you all a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you.
Great. And thanks, Amanda. This is amazing. So thank you everyone for being on this. This is probably one of the most advanced, mature conversations I've been a part of on this topic. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks.